Hey everyone, I'm Victor Dwyer, and this is the Marketing Perspective Podcast, where we talk about the latest trends in the marketing space and get people's perspectives on what's happening in the world. Today, we have Jordi on. He has over 9 years of experience and loves surfing and sailing. What's better than that? And Jordi, please give us a quick introduction about who you are and how you got here.
Yeah, thanks for having me here, Victor. Great to see your developments in the market. Yeah, like you said, I've been in the e-commerce space for a decent bit. Seen a lot in e-commerce and migrated a lot towards in the D2C trend and the migrations to D2C and how marketplaces is an important role in that. Currently work for a company called ChannelEngine. We help companies sell on a large portion of the global marketplaces. And that's also where a lot of my knowledge comes from. So happy to help and see where it's gonna get us.
Cool. Yeah, that's great. And I'd love to get your initial thoughts on when it comes down to e-commerce, like what are some trends that you're seeing right now related to fulfillment and strategies, like especially during Q4 is like because a lot of but there's a lot of delays right now and really getting it for Black Friday. I'd love to get your initial like trend analysis of like what's happening during Q4, starting out there.
Yeah, so the Q4 it's our biggest season.
Hmm.
So it's also one of the most challenging seasons. The
Yeah.
storage cost, the fulfillment cost is actually rising. There's a surcharge for this season, so that makes it hard to navigate. One is, of course, Amazon has their own, or a lot of these channels have their own fulfillment, and they give also a lot of limitations about how much you're allowed to ship, uh,
Hmm.
which is based on algorithms, based on what happened in the past year. So if you have a new product line, that can actually be pretty challenging. Managing and navigating your stock and optimizing it at this peak period is one of the crucial things a lot of our clients are doing.
Cool.
So
Yeah.
yeah, maybe that's like the thing I can dive into how much, but that's the key aspect of what's going on right now.
Yeah, I'd love to hear some strategies that you have to help encounter that and possibly help out there, especially with the high demand. It's so hard to predict. Like if a Black Friday, like for example, like let's say if one TikTok viral post goes viral on Black Friday, you went from going through $10,000 in units to $30,000 in units, and it's so hard to predict. So, what are your initial thoughts to help like estimate what's happening there and how to prepare for it?
Yeah, I think estimations are some of the hardest things in this line of work. We've seen that maybe from taking a step back, what happened in the market just over the past 3 years, where during COVID that hit and suddenly everyone's ordering online. So e-commerce orders went through the roof, and then supply chain scaled down. So there was a lot of understock, right? So there was not enough product for the demand.
Mhm.
Then, about a year ago, most companies saw the opposite, where they had too much stock, they couldn't push it through the channels that they had because they had a lot of traditional channels. And
Mhm.
I'm sure we'll dive into that a little bit later, but that was one of the big challenges that was going on. So
Mhm.
strategies right now, the main key word I would say is flexibility. Make sure that you
Mhm.
can either relocate your stock to the right locations or relocate those orders that are coming from a platform like TikTok and make sure that they can be fulfilled by either your fulfillment or other fulfillment solutions in order to actually keep pushing that stock through. Because it will continue to change and even get more fluctuant. So you need to have that flexibility.
Yeah, and what's your strategy for kind of having it making it where the Amazon if like let's say if the Amazon fulfillment runs out, having a backup 3PL, like what's your strategy to really not go out of stock during Q4?
Yeah. So in our platform, we've built something that's kind of like there's a few elements that's in there, but usually it's about fallbacks. So
Mhm.
when you're selling on Amazon, we have something called fulfillment override. When Amazon is out of stock, it automatically takes from your own warehouse or your 3PL that you have connected to our platform. So that's the first thing with, for instance, an Amazon platform. And when you're selling off of Amazon, you of course predominantly want to use your own warehouse or the 3PL that's helping you with your e-commerce orders. Now, what we've done there is have Amazon as the backup for those orders, right? So you can have Amazon fulfill the orders from your own website or from these other channels, and that is kind of like creating some of that flexibility in order to facilitate some of these changes in the market. And yeah, you can get pretty creative with it, and add a lot of different stock locations, set preferences, and start saying like, hey, I want to have this order from that location first ship here, and kind of like optimize and route that accordingly to your needs.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. And what are some other tips that you recommend for an average e-commerce seller to really help with fulfillment?
So I think it's finding the right partner
Hmm.
is, especially when you're earlier stage in the D2C, right? So we're
Yeah.
talking, typically we're talking to two type of companies, either an e-commerce native or D2C native companies. Uh,
Okay.
they they know a lot about fulfillment and optimization and having a 2-day delivery or that kind of stuff. They understand a lot about that. We're also talking about a lot of more 1P or vendor sellers that are in the bigger in that retail space, and they are now migrating themselves over to the 3P space.
Hmm.
So that's the two type of trends we're seeing. Some of the tips and tricks. So
Hmm.
for the first, it's like analyzing your data that you've already have is crucial there, and based on that, do predictions for the future. There are actually tools out there that start analyzing and do AI based predictions. We're actually
Hmm.
planning to build something like that in our platform as well in the coming year, but it is pretty challenging for the 1P or the larger vendor organizations. That's a little bit more challenging because they don't know how much is going to sell exactly on 3P. One, of course, you can still look at the 1P data, like how much sales have been taking place on Amazon vendor. Uh, the big thing I would say for those companies: find the right logistics partner, because you don't know how this works. Your warehouse isn't ready for it. Your backend system SAP isn't set for isn't ready for handle those individual orders well enough. So then a 3PL or 4PL is really advised, because they have expertise. They know kind of like what your category would do in certain periods. And yeah, that's also should be part of your selection process, right? So when you're selecting the right fulfillment partner, make sure they have that kind of knowledge. Make sure that they work with companies that are in your industry, because they know what the seasonal activity will be.
Yeah, no, that's super valuable. And with the increased cost of fulfillment and like storage and the decrease in retail sales, how can sellers effectively manage their inventory cost and maintain profitability? That's a hard task.
Yeah, that's one of the toughest things. I
Hmm.
think what I usually say at in the past year, what we've seen the most magic word or most thing we talked about related to marketplaces, especially with the more experienced marketplace sellers,
Hmm.
is profitability. How do you make sure you continue to have your profitability optimized whilst you're also maximizing your revenue, right? Because yeah, it's like the two levers you're pulling. Just dumping all your products onto a marketplace doesn't always yield in the most optimal profit margins,
Hmm.
and it might be better to sell them in a different location. So again, flexibility is important there. One, make sure you have the right products selected for the right marketplaces, because otherwise it's going to be you have a false start from the get-go. Usually that's your core product, the higher marginal products.
Hmm.
I think that's where you should start with and test it and analyze and go further. Second step, I think
Hmm.
there is making sure that you consider either making new products specifically for a channel. So some of our clients have developed products or brands even specifically to sell on Amazon, because they don't
Hmm.
want to pollute their brand with Amazon or something like that. And some of them recreate products in a new bundle. So we call it virtual bundling. You can grab two products of the same, like have a higher quantity, or combine two products at the same. And that is one of the key strategies we've
Hmm.
seen happen to optimize your sales. We call it virtual bundling. So when an order, when we place it on the marketplace as a listing, it's a new product, new UPC EAN. However, when
Hmm.
the order comes in, we split it. So your warehouse doesn't need a bundled product and individual product. It has the individual products, and it just comes in as a split order line. So that's some of the things and strategies we're doing to optimize profits.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. You mentioned that increasing the need for channel flexibility, especially through marketplaces like Amazon, FBA, and MCF. How can channel flexibility How can channel flexibility help sellers manage overstock? And what role do marketplaces play in maximizing the potential sales for excess inventory? Because I assume a lot of people out there have a lot of inventory in some products and under inventory in others. Love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I mean, our first rule of this is we push 100% of the stock to all channels.
Yeah.
So this way, it's like you have 100 products, 100 units, and that's available everywhere. The second an order comes in, we usually do a stock level reservation. That's the most fast and optimal way to make sure everywhere has the right stock. But you're not saying it only has 20 in this channel, 20 this channel, 20 this channel, which has been the traditional way and therefore not optimized.
Hmm.
The second part of that will be, again, flexibility, the migrating and moving things over, being very quick in listing some of your products and pricing or repricing some of those products
Hmm.
uh,
Yeah.
more and more aggressively in order to sell out of the stock you want to sell out. So you were talking about overstock. Some of our
Hmm.
merchants have, they just didn't have the month that they did thought they had, but more stock came to their warehouse, so they need to optimize that.
Hmm.
Some companies simply use marketplaces for their overstock. So that's a strategy, right?
Yeah.
Now there are also overstock type of marketplaces. Literally, there's one that's called overstock, but there's
Hmm.
also off-price marketplaces. Some marketplaces have good sales sections. I think ASOS is really good in doing something like that. So it's like making sure that you're utilizing and you're moving around your products where you need it to be, and definitely use marketplaces as a way to offload that overstock. But when you're seeing a product or a group go too fast, or like
Hmm.
let's say you're saying it's blowing up on TikTok, but it might just be blowing up on your own website,
Hmm.
take the listings down very quickly from all these marketplaces and sell on your own website, because that's where you get the most amount of profit. So have that at your fingertips, be flexible and move it around correctly. Yeah, that's of course you need a good person to to manage that. But yeah, if
Yeah.
you have a, let's say, a tool like ChannelEngine, it can help you a lot with
Hmm.
setting that up correctly.
And I want to go into more about multi-channel fulfillment. What are the pros and cons about multi-channel fulfillment within marketplaces? Love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, that's a good question. So just to re-clarify, multi-channel fulfillment means that Amazon would fulfill the orders from other channels. They originally built that for like regular Shopify or website orders. Now they extended it to also other marketplaces. The advantage is you can reuse the stock you have at Amazon to sell on other marketplaces. So the flexibility or the time to go live is really fast, because it's with us, it's just simply filling in your seller credentials and you have that stock available.
Hmm.
Um, some of the other benefits is they do something called blank box and last mile delivery opt out. So they actually, it doesn't come in an Amazon package with an Amazon van. So that's great. Those are some of the benefits. Um, and it's fast, right? It's 2 day shipping. Like in the US, it works really well. Some of the downsides is unfortunately the price is a bit higher, because they have to do that last mile delivery opt out and blank box, so that the cost is for them a bit higher. Usually that turns out to be slightly higher than an average 3PL as well. So at scale, it might not always make the most amount of sense. The
Hmm.
second downside, I would say more of like development, is that Amazon has figured it out in the United States. They're now figuring it out in the UK. I think they're 90%, but the rest of Europe, they're still working on making that work. Canada, I'm not entirely sure. Like, can they guarantee that blank box and last mile delivery opt out? That's like something they're working on heavily right now. We're very
Yeah.
close with them, so I think that's good.
Hmm.
Yeah, there's a few other benefits, and yeah, happy to talk through about it. But I think those are the pros and cons. Oh yeah, and maybe last thing, some channels just simply do not allow this.
Hmm.
Let's say Walmart and Target are absolutely against you using Amazon as their fulfillment options. So that's a
Yeah.
very light thing light to tread lightly, because it might end up with a suspended seller account.
Let's talk about fees real fast. Like almost all the times that Amazon's fees are almost always less than any 3PL or MCF. Is that correct?
So Amazon FBA is typically
Hmm.
the cheapest,
Yeah.
uh, simply because of their scale advantages that they have.
Hmm.
It's also their own fulfillment, right? They do it for every order on Amazon, so that's already where they get a 15 to 25% margin. So of course they can almost do FBA at a cost
Hmm.
price. That's my estimation, by the way. But
Hmm.
then MCF is about 50% higher. So it's a
Hmm.
significant step or increase. You know, look at their numbers on the website because things change over time, but make your calculations before you make this decision. I think what we are seeing a lot of our brands do is they do the first step with MCF because they already have this in their warehouse. They need something to fulfill the orders from Macy's. So let's just reuse it. And if it works, it works, right? You don't. It could also just make sense that you don't have go through the hassle of getting a 3PL logistics partner, have your stock split up in multiple locations,
Hmm.
and that kind of stuff. But it could also be just a good thing to test a new market or a new channel.
Hmm. And it's also important to note that the Amazon algorithm will actually push the multi-channel fulfillment listing more than the own Prime, just because if Amazon warehouses get too busy, they actually have that in their algorithm to push multi-channel fulfillment listings higher, and win the buy box, just so Amazon doesn't have to fulfill them in busy times. And we saw that during last Prime Day, it completely changed the game. And like I never would have thought a multi-channel fulfillment listing would ever be a Prime listing, but it did. So it's really interesting how Amazon is even leveraging those other 3PLs and going that route, even rather than using their own Prime listing. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I think one of the developments there is they had the seller fulfilled Prime, so that's like you get this Prime badge, so you still have the Prime logo, but the fulfillment is done by an external party. That was launched, I think, 7 years ago or 7, 8 years ago. Then they stopped it. No one was allowed to get that badge anymore. And about a year ago, when they started seeing like all their challenges with logistics and their own warehouse being overpacked and not being sold, that's where
Mhm.
they realized we also need some flexibility. So they started giving out these Prime badges again. However, there is a cost of 2% for that. So then again,
Yeah.
they will get you in the end, but it is a good development because overall, as a let's say e-commerce community, we need more flexibility. We need to make sure that wherever the stock is, that it is available in all the channels. That's what we and what I believe in, because that it means it's optimal. It means there's no a stock location there that has too much and there that has too little, and therefore I'm not able to buy my shoes in the right size because they're located in some warehouse somewhere in North Dakota.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. And you mentioned that the multi-channel fulfillment costs were usually 50% higher than Amazon's cost. So how does that play into the logistics of, do you end up sending more into Amazon even though what they have their like Q4 storage fees? Like how does that change the strategy by sending more into Amazon versus more into your own 3PL?
I think typically the preference is your own 3PL to do off Amazon orders because you have more flexibility. The cost would typically be lower. Um, the Yeah, I think it's just typically a better strategy. Not every company has that,
Mhm.
and some companies just want to use it as a fallback. Like I said, right, that you use
Yeah.
the 3PL first. When the 3PL is out of stock, it automatically goes to FBA or that's an FBA warehouse multi-channel fulfillment. So it's about adding that for your flexibility or for testing new markets. I wouldn't say to set it as a primary strategy. If you have a 3PL, I would say use that.
Yeah, no, that's really valuable. And then I want to touch on international expansion and what that looks like. So let's say I'm a US brand and I'm trying to expand to Europe, to any other country. What are the next steps I can take to go through that process?
Yeah, so there is a decent amount of steps. You have to think about your VAT and potentially an entity creation and uh, having local expertise and connections with those channels. That's a lot of things. From a fulfillment or logistics perspective, of course, you also want a local party. You can consider shipping from the US to those locations, but it's usually suboptimal. There's a long shipping time. There's a high shipping cost to do that with individual products. So that's not always the optimal way. You can do that again to test a little bit,
Yeah,
but yeah, I would say consider having a local fulfillment partner and select them correctly.
cool.
There again, you have the similar strategy, right? You can consider either using Amazon and Amazon FBA or Amazon MCF for that, or look at some of those 3PLs. There are a decent amount of 3PLs. For instance, we are connected to over 20 in Europe. But usually we end up only advising one or two or three because of the type of product, the seasonal activities, the size, the regions, the countries. Some countries are allowed to ship from one to the other. You have to register everything correctly though, and you do have to calculate your own taxes.
Yeah,
Or actually, our platform, for instance, calculates some of those taxes, but you have to keep track of where what is. Using partners typically will have a higher chance of success.
cool. Awesome. And when it comes down to anything else, international expansion wise, what tips would you give a person that is selling in the US and thinking about selling anywhere else? What are some tips that you would have in there? You kind of describe the process, but what tips would you have for someone to trying to expand internationally?
Yeah, I think it's one is determining the right strategy. Um, Going into a market without thinking about what you want to achieve with it might make it challenging.
Yeah.
Of course, a lot of companies say, "Hey, I want to just increase my revenue." That is fine. That's an okay reason, right? Some companies say we want a higher profit, or we just want to have our brand present in a region, or
Mhm.
we actually want to get rid of our overstock because our warehouses here in the US are full, and let me just send it
Mhm.
somewhere else.
Yeah.
I think those are some of the tips, or like make sure you're strategic about it, write down what you want, and then have a process on how to measure that success.
Yeah.
Two, make sure you have you take some time and also some money for your marketing budget, etc. Using marketplaces is a really good way to address an audience that doesn't know your brand yet. So that's why it's you have thousands of shoppers on those platforms. They're not always, by the way, they're not always Amazon. A lot of localized markets, or even fashion, has their own, Zalando as a marketplace, for instance, which is much larger in fashion than, for instance, Amazon is in Europe. So
Interesting.
that's a second, and a third. That's maybe more of like a trend I wanted to add. What we're seeing today is the Middle East has been growing tremendously. Just
Mhm.
in general, the amount of people that are moving there. What's interesting, the amount of companies that started selling there has been pretty limited. So they actually have a shortage of product. They don't
Mhm.
have enough companies selling their products into that market. So like think about those trends. People might, like, let's say, people with money moving to a market like that, but because it's complicated to enter that market in terms of entities and how you start selling there, people refrain from it. Now there are a few channels there like New, Namshi, and a few others that are making it very easy. They even have warehouses here, and they do the fulfillment and logistics and tax process. So, think about that. That don't forget about the market like that,
Mhm.
or in general localized market trends, right? APAC and Southeast Asia, where TikTok and social commerce is blowing up more than anywhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of trends going on. So keep track of the world trends to determine
Yeah.
where you're going to go and how.
Yeah, that's super valuable. And like I think it all starts with doing the consumer research on if your product would be valuable there, and then utilizing some type of fulfillment service to get the actual product there for a cheap enough cost. I think there's a lot of advantages to that, especially if you're trying to, since the U.S. market is so competitive now these days,
Yeah.
that like I feel like a lot of these other markets are going to be a lot less competitive, where you could potentially have more profit in the future.
Yeah, and those kind of regions love also the products that the US have. And that's why it's important to do that research. A lot of these channels also facilitate that, right? For larger brands, we know because we guide and we have a good partnership with Noon. They often do that research even and say what is the revenue prediction.
Mhm.
Um, Now, for other regions and channels, we also sometimes note a little bit what are the successful categories and where do we think these companies would be successful. Uh, that's why
Mhm.
use partners and use people localized that know, and therefore you can make your right assessment and analysis.
Yeah. And I want to touch on profitability a little bit. So, a lot of people are really, really struggling with the shrinking margins and the struggling with profitability. What would you recommend for someone fulfillment wise to help them increase their profitability?
Yeah, that's a challenging one. I think profitability shrinks because of the increasing cost in fulfillment,
Hmm.
but also in other areas, right?
Yeah.
Marketing, advertising, just in general, there's a increase in cost and a decrease in spend, and therefore, with all the overstock and liquidations that are going on, and
Hmm.
retailers that are going bankrupt, it's becoming a very challenging
Hmm.
space in general. With
Yeah.
fulfillment specifically, yeah, the main thing I would say, coming back to that, virtual bundling is one of the best things we've seen be successful. Some companies don't even sell their products individually. Anything under $30 is basically not really worth it to try to sell and do your own fulfillment for. So bundling those products, I think, has been very, very helpful. Of course, in general, also in e-commerce, right, you see a lot of companies set a minimum of how much you should spend before you ship it. So that's some of the other tactics. Um, yeah, I think in general, being flexible with it will help the most. Also, don't be afraid to take down products that are not that profitable,
Hmm.
right? Because the average of it's about the average profitability. So if that's just not good enough, you might just want to take them down or stop those products altogether and focus on products that are working. That's something we're seeing as well. Like some of our clients just take down certain listings, and they're like, we're just going to focus on stuff that works for us. Um, Lastly, finding new channels with less competition is one of the key things you can dive into, right? So think about Amazon has so many sellers with so many products, and it's so hard to be present. Walmart has an average of around 52% less cost per click in some of the industries for just selling the same product. So it actually
Hmm.
can just be beneficial to think about that. And I think about there's so many less sellers on Macy's or even curated platforms like Target Plus. So that could just decrease the other type of spend, like advertising and marketing.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I want to talk about what the future now. What are some trends that you see in the future of fulfillment strategies and inventory and where things are going to go? And I know that's a big question. It's a loaded question,
Yeah,
but I
that's
was
a
just
that's a
curious
big
on any
question.
trends that you think are going to happen in the future.
Um, so some of the trends we're seeing is, well, now social commerce is a big trend. Globalization is a big trend, and sort of like that overstock situation. Those are some of the main trends we're seeing. But
Yeah.
at the marketplace front, we're seeing a lot of marketplaces launching their own fulfillment services. So of course, Amazon has it, Walmart has it. Now Walmart is thinking about what's our answer to MCF, right?
Hmm.
Zalando, same thing in Europe, fashion marketplace, big fashion marketplace. What is their answer to the MCF program? Because the big benefit for a marketplace is they can increase their scale. They have more packages and more volume, and therefore their costs will go down.
Hmm.
But they don't have the reliability or the risk of owning that stock, right? So the owning of stock is one of the biggest challenges that the big retailers have to be going through. That's why Amazon basically said we're decreasing all our 1P purchase orders. Yeah, because they just don't want to have that risk anymore. That one quarter the sales isn't there, so they just want to make sure that they can still do the get those orders in, get the margins from that, but also increase their presence in logistics. So I think,
Hmm.
long story short, marketplaces are going to become a more important, especially Amazon is going to be a crucial play in logistics in general.
Yeah.
Um, they've now, I think they have their own ships and their own planes and their own, like they're going to do the entire supply chain from your doorstep in China, in your warehouse or your manufacturer in China. They just, I think they now have a program from the manufacturer to the end consumer, and they handle everything, right?
It's crazy.
It's
Yeah.
it's it's a bit dangerous though. I like the dependency on one organization is pretty insane.
Yeah, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. I ordered a hard drive like 2 days ago, and it showed up within 3 hours, and I was like, I don't even know how that's possible. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, I got it in 3 hours, so that really blew my mind. Uh, but yeah,
Well,
I
good for
wanted
you.
to
You
get
got
your
it so fast. Yeah.
yeah, I wanted to get your thoughts on emerging technologies that a lot of e-commerce sellers should stay ahead of and keep up to date for the future.
Emerging technologies.
Yeah, like in the fulfillment space that people should be looking to making sure that they are like ahead of the game and staying ahead of the game. Really.
That's one of your toughest questions so far. I think
Hmm.
what we're seeing is a lot of the technologies are growing closer to each other.
Hmm.
So we're getting closer in the OMS space, order management space, and OMS into our space, or PIM and the channel space. And so it's like, I think what I'm trying to say here is, when you select technology partners, make sure you don't only understand what they're doing today, but also where are they going to grow towards. And second, how much of a partnership is it going to be versus just a transaction? Uh, the
Hmm.
companies who are switching over from our competition are usually complaining because they are in a transactional, like business transaction, instead of in a partnership. And I
Hmm.
think the newer ways of being a technology provider or vendor for merchants is just simply be an overall partner. See where you can help. Do they have a good partner ecosystem and a good roadmap? How's their leadership? How's their funding? Right. So making sure you do your right analysis on that.
Hmm.
And it's not always that the biggest player is the best. So that's
Yeah.
just, we can say that as not being the biggest player, but it's, yeah, we're seeing a lot of people switch over to us from the biggest player. So it's just an interesting uh, trend going on. I hope
Yeah.
that answers your question a little bit. I know you asked maybe for more specifics, but that's like what we're seeing in this space. And of course, there's AI. Maybe the last piece, and I didn't want to talk too much about AI. I think AI embedding that in your software it's pretty straightforward. How and what the plans are with it, I think is more crucial. For instance, we see those virtual bundles are crucial. We've embedded AI into it and making it unique. That's something that you can do with AI without, like, not outside the platform. We could use it to generate new content, but anyone can do that, right?
Hmm.
Or generate new content from these individual products. But we're now letting it generate content and images for those bundles, which is, you can't do that otherwise. So I think that's some of the things we're really trying to get it at. And I think, yeah, having technology companies do a smart play with how AI is enhancing it is important. Just simple pure AI companies, I think we've also seen some of them fall through pretty roughly with like an AI ID, get a big funding, and then like nothing happened. So I think also be careful with that.
Yeah. No, that's super valuable. And is there anything else that you wanted to add on to for anything else that we talked about, whether related to fulfillment, profitability? Is there anything else that you wanted to add on to what we talked about before?
No, I think we covered most points. I
Mhm.
think it's important to develop a good fulfillment strategy. I think the word strategy in general is good. I think about it up front instead of just going with it. But
Mhm.
also don't be afraid to move things around. And if you need a new 3PL partner, select a new 3PL partner. Right? The market is changing faster than ever. Either your vendors are going to change with it and amplify it, or they're
Mhm.
gonna make it very hard for you to migrate and not be flexible. So
Yeah.
yeah, work with the companies and partners that are flexible and quick in moving around, and then I think you'll stay ahead, or at least in pace with
Mhm.
the trends.
Yeah, I have one more question before we sign off. What is the one key takeaway that you want the audience to take off of this and go implement on their business right away? Whether it's fulfillment strategies or anything else, what would be the one key takeaway you would have for them?
Yeah, maybe one thing I haven't called out is don't be afraid to test new things. I see so many companies that are so careful with making a step. Uh, it went from the fear of missing out to the fear of effing up. That's
Yeah.
like that's literally a trend we're seeing
Mhm.
in companies we're working with or that we're just talking with. So sometimes you just have to make a decision and really go for it, right? It's just yeah, and I see that decision making processes have increased complexity. So I think that doesn't help with the increased volatility in the market. So make sure your organization is also capable of being flexible and migrating, and give ownership to the people that need to do it. Have the right people in the right place that are thinking about those market trends and staying ahead of it, instead of rusty people that are comfortable in their position and just do what they do, right? So, because that's not gonna cut it for you to reach your growth goals.
Wow. Jordi, thank you. That's so valuable. That's all we have time for today. Jordi, please tell them how to find you, how to find more about Channel Engine, and all that information.
Yeah. Well, you can find me on LinkedIn, Jordi Vermeer.
Mhm.
My last name is pretty famous Dutch painter. So as you hear, I'm actually also Dutch here, but I'm located in New York. ChannelEngine is our company name. We also have a LinkedIn page, web page. Do some browsing and see how and what we do. Happy to have open conversations and see like if there's any way we can help.
Cool. Awesome. Jordi, thank you so much for joining. And thank you everyone for watching. This is the Marketing Perspective Podcast, and we'll catch you next time.